this episode, we're going to take the idea of multiple accounts and make it manageable by introducing the structure that keeps many accounts from turning into a messy pile. When organizations first expand into multi-account designs, they often create accounts for good reasons, like separating production from development, but they stop short of building the hierarchy that keeps governance consistent. That is where organizational units come in, because they give you a way to group accounts so policies, permissions, and guardrails can be applied predictably. Predictable inheritance is the real prize here, because it reduces the number of one-off configurations and makes security outcomes repeatable. If you do this well, you can grow from a handful of accounts to dozens without losing control. By the end, you should understand what organizational units are at a conceptual level, why grouping matters, and how security inheritance becomes a deliberate design choice instead of an accidental side effect. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. An organizational unit is best understood as a grouping layer that sits above individual accounts and below the top-level organization, giving you a place to apply governance in bulk. Different cloud providers name and implement this idea in different ways, but the concept is consistent. You create a tree-like structure where accounts are children under parent groupings. Those groupings allow you to attach policies or guardrails once and have them apply to every account in that branch. This reduces repetitive manual work and limits drift, which is the slow divergence of security settings over time. Beginners sometimes confuse organizational units with account tags or labels, but organizational units are stronger because they typically participate in inheritance. When inheritance is designed intentionally, it becomes one of the most powerful ways to maintain security consistency across growth. Inheritance is the mechanism that makes grouping meaningful, and it is worth thinking about it as a flow of rules from parent to child. When a policy is applied at a higher level, it can cascade down to accounts and resources below, shaping what those accounts can do. This can include restrictions that prevent dangerous configurations, requirements that enforce certain security controls, or monitoring settings that ensure consistent visibility. The advantage is that a new account created under a well-governed organizational unit starts life with a secure baseline rather than starting as an empty space. That secure baseline reduces time to safety and prevents the common mistake of forgetting to enable critical controls. The risk is that inheritance can also spread mistakes widely if the parent level is misconfigured. Understanding inheritance means respecting both its power and its potential blast radius. To structure organizational units well, you need a logical basis for grouping that aligns with real differences in risk, operational behavior, and control needs. One common grouping pattern separates environments, such as production, non-production, and sandbox spaces, because each environment category has different tolerance for flexibility. Production environments usually demand strict guardrails, stable configurations, and tightly controlled permissions. Non-production environments often need faster iteration, but they still benefit from baseline protections like logging, identity discipline, and restrictions against obvious dangerous exposures. Sandbox environments may allow experimentation but should still be monitored to prevent abuse and should be isolated to protect the rest of the organization. Grouping by environment category creates predictable inheritance because you can apply strong guardrails where they matter most and still maintain a minimum standard everywhere. Another grouping approach is by business unit or organizational function, especially in larger organizations where different departments have distinct responsibilities and data sensitivity. If one business unit handles regulated information while another handles low-risk workloads, the security and compliance requirements may differ enough to justify separate organizational branches. Grouping accounts by business unit can clarify ownership and simplify reporting because governance can reflect that organizational reality. It also supports delegation, where each unit manages its own accounts while central security sets minimum standards across all units. The risk is that business unit grouping can lead to inconsistent security if units are allowed to diverge too much. This is why the top-level organization often maintains baseline guardrails that apply everywhere, while organizational units add stricter rules where needed. A mature structure balances autonomy with consistent minimum protections. A third useful grouping dimension is workload type, because not all cloud workloads behave the same way or require the same controls. For example, accounts dedicated to shared services, such as centralized logging, identity management, or networking hubs, often require different access patterns and stronger protections. If shared services are mixed into the same organizational unit as general application workloads, policies may either be too strict for apps or too loose for shared services. Separating shared services into their own group allows you to apply specialized guardrails, such as extra restrictions on modification, stricter monitoring, and stronger change control expectations. Beginners sometimes underestimate shared services risk, but attackers often target them because they provide leverage across the environment. Grouping shared services thoughtfully is therefore a defensive move, not just an administrative preference. Predictable inheritance also depends on consistency in how you create and place accounts, because a hierarchy only works if new accounts land in the right branch by default. If account placement is ad hoc, policies may not apply as intended and drift becomes inevitable. A disciplined approach defines where new accounts belong based on their purpose, environment class, and ownership. This reduces the chance that a production account accidentally inherits non-production rules, or that a sandbox account inherits overly permissive policies. It also makes audits easier because you can reason about expected controls based on where an account sits in the tree. Beginners often assume structure is something you can retrofit later, but retrofitting structure in the cloud can be painful because accounts may already contain complex workloads and trust relationships. Designing structure early reduces later operational friction. Permissions and identity roles can also inherit through organizational groupings, which is both helpful and risky depending on how it is managed. If you assign broad administrative access at high levels, those permissions may automatically apply to many accounts, undermining separation. A more secure approach is to keep high-level identities limited and carefully monitored, while granting scoped access within organizational units based on job responsibilities. This supports least privilege while still enabling efficient administration across multiple accounts. When a team needs access to all non-production accounts, for example, that access should be granted at the organizational unit level with clear boundaries, not by individually granting permissions account by account in a scattered way. Group-based access simplifies management, but it must be designed to avoid creating universal keys. Predictable inheritance should produce predictable control, not predictable overreach. Policy design for inheritance benefits from thinking in layers, where you define a baseline that applies everywhere and then add stricter policies as you move into higher-risk branches. The baseline might include mandatory logging, minimum identity protections, and restrictions against clearly unsafe configurations. Higher-risk branches, such as production or regulated data units, might add additional restrictions on public exposure, stricter approval requirements for sensitive actions, or tighter limits on privileged roles. This layered approach mirrors how security controls work in general, where you start with broad fundamentals and then add targeted measures where risk demands it. Beginners sometimes try to create one policy set that fits all, but that often leads either to excessive friction or to watered-down controls. Layering allows flexibility without sacrificing core safety. Predictable inheritance becomes a way to encode that layered security philosophy into the structure itself. Centralized visibility is another reason organizational units matter, because monitoring and investigation are easier when logs and controls are consistent across a branch. If every account in a production organizational unit sends audit logs to a protected central location, defenders can investigate incidents without depending on local administrators. When logs are configured consistently by inheritance, it is less likely that one account silently lacks critical telemetry. This is especially important because attackers may target accounts with weaker monitoring. By designing organizational units with inherited logging requirements, you reduce the chance of blind spots developing as the environment grows. Consistency also improves correlation because events across accounts can be compared using the same data structures and retention expectations. A well-governed hierarchy therefore strengthens both prevention and response. Organizational structure also supports containment and recovery because it clarifies which accounts are considered part of a trusted zone and which are more experimental. During an incident, responders must often make rapid decisions about isolation boundaries, and a clear organizational hierarchy provides a map of expected trust relationships. If a sandbox account is compromised, the response may focus on containing that branch and validating whether any bridges exist into production. If a production account is compromised, the response may include broader scrutiny of shared services and identity systems because production environments are typically more tightly integrated with critical resources. The hierarchy does not replace investigation, but it provides a starting framework that speeds decision-making. Beginners often underestimate the operational value of clear structure during crises. Predictable structure supports predictable response. Ultimately, structuring organizational units and account groupings is about making security inheritance deliberate, repeatable, and scalable. Organizational units create a hierarchy where policies, access controls, and monitoring standards can flow predictably from parent to child. When you group accounts by meaningful dimensions like environment, business unit, or workload type, you can apply guardrails that match risk without constantly reinventing configuration choices. The layered approach of baseline controls plus stricter branch-specific controls helps maintain both flexibility and safety as the cloud footprint grows. On the exam, this concept often appears when you must choose how to apply governance at scale or how to ensure new accounts inherit correct protections automatically. In real environments, organizational unit structure is how cloud defense stays coherent under growth, turning many accounts into a system you can actually govern rather than a sprawl you can only hope is safe.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.